My name is Ryan Conley. I am the worship associate for this month, and I also serve this congregation as co-chair of worship. I came to this congregation about 2 years ago after a long hiatus from religious life at a time when I needed to recommit myself. And what I found here was acceptance, care, and a deep willingness to meet one another as we are. This weekend, as our nation remarks on our 250th year of independence, we gathered not simply to celebrate our history, but to reflect on the enduring promise of liberty, equality, and justice. Independence is not only something remembered in the past, it is a calling that asks each generation to broaden the circle of freedom and to ensure that blessings of liberty belong to everyone. Among us today are people with many perspectives and many understandings of what patriotism means. Some come with pride, some with pain, and many with both. Here we make room for all those experiences. It does not matter who you love, how you dress, what your income may be, or how you arrived in this space. Whether you walked, rolled, or moved with assistance, whether your gender is cisgender, transgender, non-binary, or beyond categories, whether you love men, women, or have no need for labels at all, whether your life feels settled or uncertain, you are welcome here. May this hour remind us that love of country is at best when it inspires us to care for one another, to defend the dignity of every person, and to continue the unfinished work of building a more just and compassionate world. Chalice lighting for the service of the separation of church and state by Tracy Bleckney. This chalice burns with twin flames. The first flame burns for those who seek and defend the right to free and responsible search for truth and meaning, so that each person may live according to conscience in the democratically elected society. The second flame burns for the defenders of freedom, working against those who would impose their own religious beliefs on others through intimidation or legislation. May we tend this fire always, ever vigilant and courageous in the struggle for freedom and justice for all. We now come to our time in our service when we acknowledge the fullness of life, its joys and its sorrows, its light and its shadows. Kiani can come forward to light our lamps, and we will light our first lamp for the joys that bless our lives, for those we name aloud and those we held quietly in our hearts. We give thanks for connection, community, and the freedoms that allow us to gather openly, to speak our truths, to seek meaning, and to care for one another across our differences. May our shared joy be a blessing to the wider world, a reminder that liberty finds its fullest expression when it is joined with compassion and generosity. We light our second lamp for the sorrows we carry, our griefs, our struggles, our burdens, spoken and unspoken. As our nation commemorates 250 years of independence, we hold in our hearts a deep sadness that what was intended to be a celebration uniting the American people has for many become yet another reminder of our profound divisions. We grieve a time when neighbors so often see one another first through political labels rather than a shared humanity. When disagreement too easily becomes contempt, and when fear and anger drown out curiosity and compassion. May we remember that democracy asks more of us than winning arguments or elections. It asks us to listen, to speak with integrity, to protect one another's rights, and to recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person, especially with those whom we disagree. May we have the courage to build bridges where others build walls, and choose understanding over resentment, hope over cynicism, and love over fear. As these lamps burn, may they remind us joy and sorrow are the threads of the same fabric of life. May the light of joy uplift us. May the light of sorrow deepen our compassion. And may both lights guide us toward a greater love, deeper gratitude, and a future where freedom, justice, and peace are shared by everyone. Please join me in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life, source of love, truth, and courage, known by many names and by none at all. As we gather on this Independence Day weekend, we pause to remember that freedom is more than a word etched into history. It is a promise that has inspired generations, challenged generations, and called generations to become something better than they were before. We give thanks for those who dreamed of liberty, for those who expanded its reach, and for those who continue the work today. For every voice that has spoken against injustice, for every hand extended in reconciliation, for every act of courage that has made our nation a little more worthy of its ideals. Yet we also come with heavy hearts. We live in a time where many no longer see fellow citizens, but opponents. When conversation becomes accusation, when certainty leaves room for curiosity, little room for curiosity, when our differences are amplified while our common humanity is forgotten. May we resist the temptation to answer contempt with contempt. May we remember that every person carries a story we do not fully understand. May we be people who listen before judging, who seek understanding before victory, and whose measure our successes by not the volumes of our voices, but by the depth of our compassion. Give us the wisdom to hold both love of country and the courage to improve it. May we celebrate what is noble, learn from what is painful, and never mistake patriotism for perfection. A nation, like a person, grows stronger not by denying its flaws, but by facing them with honesty, humility, and hope. May we leave this place committed to building the kind of community our progeny deserve, one where freedom is shared, justice is pursued, diversity is celebrated, and every person's inherent worth and dignity is honored. Amen.
Our opening words are from John Milton, from The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates. If men within themselves would be governed by reason, and not generally give up their understanding to a double tyranny of custom from without and blind affections within, they would discern better what it is to favor and uphold the tyrant of a nation. But being slaves within doors, no wonder that they strive so much to have the public state of comfortability governed to the inward vicious rule, by which they govern themselves. For indeed, none can love freedom heartily, but good men. The rest love not freedom, but license, which never hath more scope or more indulgence than under tyrants. Good morning. There is a strange feeling in the air this year, and especially around this time, as the United States has just turned 250 years old. It feels like it should be better. Something grand, a milestone, a celebration of our independence. And while there have been fireworks, so many fireworks, and pageantries of flags and parades, the standard public ceremonies with all of the usual public rituals for our annual celebration of our country's birth, the grand self-mythology behind them seems a bit thin. For a great many, it rings more hollow than not this year. I look back at the pictures from the bicentennial, before my time, and the stories of those who were there 50 years ago, and I find myself wanting to feel what they seem to have felt. The grandeur, the crowds, all across the nation, the red, the white, the blue, everywhere. The sense, at least from the photographs and the grainy video, that the country could gather around at least its own birthday and feel a shared sense of wonder. But, of course, it is not that simple. Even then, there were complicated feelings around the nation, around the bicentennial, which came in the wake of Watergate. And just 1 year after the, shall we say, conclusion of the Vietnam War. It came amid economic crisis, energy anxiety, deep political mistrust, and even broader social change. There was an interesting NPR article that looked at the past American milestones, the birthdays, for some of the eerie parallels between 1976 and 2026. A country trying to celebrate in the aftermath of impeachment, of major Supreme Court fights over executive power, terrible international conflicts, economic anxieties, and of course, it feels like the more things change. So, while the feelings may be strange, they are certainly not new. America's big birthdays have always been haunted by the country that America actually is. Going back to the first one, 1826, just 50 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed, that first celebration saw the deaths of both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson on the same day, within hours of each other. The two founders, once friends, then bitter political rivals, to put it nicely, were, at least at the end, old men who wrote to each other again and only maybe cursed each other on their deathbeds. They died on the national birthday, and the country took it as providence. But the feelings were still complicated. In 1876, the centennial came with grandeur, the Industrial Revolution, and America's first World's Fair, a showcase of innovation, commerce, and national ambition. The global debut of our new Gilded Age, just 1 decade after the Civil War, and at the end of Reconstruction. It also notably excluded blacks and non-whites. It's not that they were explicitly banned, they just weren't invited. In 1926, the 150th, it tried to repeat the grandeur of the centennial, but instead became a mess of planning, corruption, mud, heat, and leaking pavilions. To say it was a massive public embarrassment would be an understatement, with reports from the time calling it America's greatest flop. But the deeper failure was not just that the fair went badly. It was that it meant something for this national civic celebration to be overtaken by political ambition, corruption, ego, and private gain. I am looking at you, Congressman William Bear. The city had been promised a grand celebration of the nation's birthday, but Philadelphia was left in debt, scandal, and with the consequences of its own leaders using the event to secure and enrich themselves and leaving the public to pay the bill. So maybe that's just what happens when America tries to celebrate itself. The symbols come out to play, but so do the contradictions. We want the birthday to give us a clean story, a moment when we can just celebrate the good, when we can just sit back and enjoy the fireworks that mean freedom, the flags that mean unity, and the parades with grandeur and revelry. And underneath all of our divisions, there is still a shared inheritance that we can all safely share and call ourselves Americans. And maybe there is. But this year, that inheritance feels more contested than ever. The Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution does mean what it says about birthright citizenship, rejecting an executive order that tried to say otherwise. On one level, that ruling is reassuring. There is something powerful in that, something deeply American in the best sense. A child born here, and the nation cannot simply look at their parents, their status, their language, their origin, and say, not here, not ours, not one of us. That's not how it works in America. That is a profound idea. And it is not an accidental one. The 14th Amendment was born out of one of the deepest moral catastrophes in our history. It was written as a direct response to the ending of slavery in this country. It was written because of Dred Scott, where the Supreme Court had once declared that Black people could not be citizens even if they weren't property. Birthright citizenship was not some small, narrow technicality. It is one of the ways the Constitution has tried to answer for one of America's oldest sins, defining citizenship through exclusion. It would be upheld again in 1898 when the Supreme Court decided in the case of Wong Kim Ark, a Chinese American man who was born here and denied re-entry. He sued the U.S. government under the 14th Amendment. And they declared that, yes, he was a citizen. He was born here. But it is worth noting that the judges who dissented in that case and the ones who dissented last week are also part of our American story. Neither of those rulings were unanimous. There were dissents in both cases, with justices who would have allowed for a narrower understanding of who is constitutionally granted citizenship. And that, too, is part of our American story. Because for all of our ideals, America has always been defined by both inclusion and exclusion. One says, if you were born here, you belong here. And the other says, prove it, earn it, justify it. And even then, maybe we'll still say no. Last year, I spoke about this time about the paradox of America, a nation founded on the language of opportunity and equality, but defined for most of its history by its exclusion and exploitation. Paradox is not incidental. It is not a contradiction of fault. It is not something to be tucked away in our footnotes. It is the central tension in the American thesis. Because America has always been both a nation of promise and betrayal. It has been the nation that says to all people are created equal, while the authors of those exact words enslaved people. It has been the nation that speaks broadly and loudly of liberty, while stealing its national lands from the original inhabitants. It would write treaties and break them with every single native nation on this continent. And it built its tremendous wealth through forced labor. It has been a nation of immigrants, a nation that has again and again tried to decide which immigrants count as people. Who's white enough? Who's useful enough? Who's legal enough to get to stay here? And still, if we stop there, we miss something important. Because the original promise is not nothing. In fact, the ideas that founded this nation were quite literally revolutionary. I would say some of them were even extraordinary. Not because the people who wrote them were pure of heart, not because they were messianic prophets ordained by divine providence to build a holy nation, as some would claim. No, they very much were not. They were flawed people. But they were the educated, property-owning men of a British colony. Many of them were wealthy. Many of them were enslavers. Many benefited directly from the systems of exploitation that they claimed to oppose. They were frustrated with the monarchy, with how the empire treated them, with taxation, with distant rule, with their own lack of political power within the world they occupied. So no, the founding generation did not somehow transcend the sins of their age. They carried those sins with them. They protected them in law. They compromised their morality when it suited them. They built a nation that spoke of liberty while wiping out natives and enslaving Africans. And still, embedded in the founding of this country were the ideas that would change the order of the world. In a world shaped by kings, crowns, churches, through inherited power and the divine right of rule, the ideas that would become the United States dared to imagine something different. That a nation could be held together not by the body of a monarch, but by the authority of its people. That it would not be defined by a church or a bloodline, but by laws, by a central constitution, where rights were enshrined from the consent of the governed, They created a nation through the ongoing participation of its people. That had never been done before or even attempted. That is not a small thing. The idea that government should derive its power from the governed, radical. The idea that no king stood above the law, radical. The idea that the Constitution could define power, radical. The idea that public office should not require a religious test, radical. The idea that a state should not own the words, the speech, or the faith of its people, radical. And of all of those ideas, larger than the people who first wrote them, that may be one of the strangest graces of American history. They built into the founding of this country the machinery to make it better, because they knew it was not perfect and it would not be finished with them. I mean, the very first thing they did was amend it 10 times. Again and again, the people who were excluded from the promise took that promise seriously anyways. The enslaved people, the abolitionists, indigenous leaders, women, immigrants, workers of all stripe, queer and trans people, religious minorities, disabled people, organizers, rabble-rousers, teachers, ordinary citizens in every century since then have all demanded that the country become more accountable to its original promise, to the words that it started with. And even if it never fully meant them, that is what America can be, a place that can become better than what it is. That is why people still want to be American. There is still a dream for a better life here. So that brings me to the question today. Pride and patriotism. Let me ask you something. When you hear the word patriotism, what happens in your body? Does it feel warm and fuzzy? Do you feel in danger? Does it feel corny and distant, like it belongs to someone else? When you see the flag up here, what do you feel first? Pride? Grief? Suspicion? Gratitude? Anger? Nothing at all? If someone asked you, and you don't have to say this out loud, but if I asked you, are you proud of this country? What do you think the answer would be? Because I'll be honest, I just can't say it. I can't say I am proud of my country. Not because I don't care about this country, not because I think there is nothing worthy of being honored. No, I struggle with that because that sentence feels like it is asking me to leave too much out. It can feel like I am being asked to be proud in a way that requires my silence. Pride without grief. pride without anger, proud without the acknowledgement of all those who have been harmed by that pride, who have been excluded, who have been told that America was not meant for them. And I just can't do that. But I also don't think we can simply abandon the language of patriotism. That we can't be, in a sense, proud of our nation. That I am denied that. I don't think I can just hand over the flag, the Constitution, and the very language of our freedoms, that the ideas that made America, and say, fine, you can have them. I don't want them. They hurt me too much. I can't do that without a fight. Because we know what happens when committed people to justice give up the language and the symbols of that struggle. Someone else will pick them up and run with them. We have seen this with religion. When liberal, pluralistic, justice-centered people of faith largely abandoned religious language, we saw who picked it up. And now they say, claiming happily and fully and without contest, God says this, the Bible says this, faith means this, morality is this. And then their cruelty is dressed up as righteousness. Political domination becomes holy sanction. Exclusionary, reactionary white supremacy becomes calls to return traditional values and to make America great again. That is why it matters for people of faith to stand up and say, no, you do not own God. You do not own Scripture. You do not own morality. You do not get to use your worship of power and call it faith. And that matters especially in America, because one of the truly radical ideas at the heart of this country was the separation of church and state. Not because the founders were anti-religion. Many of them deeply were shaped by their faith. We claim many of them as Unitarians. But because they understood when church and state become one, both are corrupted. A government that belongs to one religion does not protect faith. A church that needs the power of state to enforce its belief is not a church. So when people today insist that America was, is, or must be a Christian nation, I do not hear patriotism. I hear a betrayal of one of the best things America ever tried to be. A nation where no church owns the government, and where no government owns the church. Where civic participation is not at the discretion of someone else's religion. I think there is something similar with patriotism. If the only people who are willing to speak the symbols, the symbolic language of America are those who would make America small, scared, and just for them, then their narrowness wins. If the only people willing to wave the flag are those who would stand for white Christian nationalism, then the flag becomes theirs and no one else's. If the only people willing to claim the Constitution are those who would use it to protect their own power and privilege, then the Constitution ceases to be a living document, and we might as well be a monarchy again. No, I can't do that. Because that's what we're up against. We're not just in a struggle over the symbols, over the language, over the very meaning of things. We get to participate. What does it mean to have freedom? What does citizenship mean? What does patriotism mean? What does it mean to be American? Because we are Americans too. Does it mean obedience or does it mean responsibility? Does it mean comfort or does it mean truth? Does it mean preserving the past exactly as some would like to remember it? Or does it mean taking the hard steps forward to become a more perfect union? Pew's research on national pride directly addresses this. They asked, what Americans all over the country, what makes them proud of the United States? The most common answer was freedom and liberty. But the negative responses were also common, with 22% mentioning freedom and 20% naming something negative or saying they were not proud at all. That tells me something important. Freedom is still central to how we see and understand our country. But the meaning of that freedom is deeply, deeply contested. And maybe that is the real question. Not whether we believe in freedom, but what kind of freedom, whose freedom do we mean? There is a version of that freedom that means, no, you cannot tell me what to do. And there is a version of that freedom that says, I should not have to be accountable to anyone. There is a version of that freedom that becomes domination, where the powerful demand freedom from criticism, freedom from history, freedom from judgment or consequence. Freedom from having to share the country with people they do not want here. But there is another kind of freedom, the freedom to live without fear, the freedom to vote, the freedom to dissent, the freedom to worship or not worship as you choose, the freedom to organize and assemble, the freedom to love, the freedom to belong without having to erase yourself first, the freedom to criticize your country because you are part of it, freedom of speech. That is the freedom I still believe is worth defending. And that is where I am proud of my country. For those who stand up and defend that freedom. That is why patriotism, for me, cannot mean pretending America is good or always has been good. Patriotism means wanting the country I love to be better than what it is. It means believing the rule of law still matters, that Constitution still matters, that our history, the entirety of it, the good, the bad, the really ugly, still matters. That protesting matters, that legal fights matter, that public pressure matters, that the ordinary people can act and force our country to be more faithful to its promises. That is not anti-American. That is how almost every good thing in America has been made possible. The country did not simply become more inclusive as time passed. It became better and more America because it was pushed and pulled and people strained with all of their might to pull the moral arc of history towards justice. So when people say telling the truth about slavery, genocide, racism, exclusion, labor, all the other things, queer resistance, religious domination, saying anything bad about America is an attack on America, I think they are revealing just how fragile their patriotism is, how small their love of country is. If you cannot survive knowing it in full, that is not love, it is nostalgia. If your pride requires that everyone else stay silent about their wounds, then it's not really pride. It's protecting yourself from reality. And yet, I do want to be careful here, because I do not think the feelings underneath that kind of pride are fake. I think they are very real. I believe that all of these people, here and around, really do love the country they believe America to be. They really do feel attachment to this flag, to family, to sacrifice, to their home, to the stories they were raised with. And when that story is challenged, when someone says, yes, but also look at all of these other terrible things, it can feel not just that the country is being attacked, but they are being attacked because they have tied so much of themselves into that story. They are the ones being attacked. That is the painful thing about this kind of patriotism. It's not that the love is unreal. It is that the love cannot bear the full truth. It clings to the surface knowing that looking underneath would require grief, accountability, and the kind of moral disorientation that many people have never been asked to face. So, instead of holding this tension, they reject it. They don't want to hear it because history like that is a betrayal, and repair is a punishment. And that is what makes it so dangerous. Because once people have been convinced that their neighbors are the reason for their suffering, it becomes all too easy to sell cruelty as protection. It becomes a simple matter to call exclusion safety, censorship, patriotism, domination, freedom. And once that happens, we are truly not America anymore. And that's why we cannot simply walk away and wash our hands of patriotism, of care for our country, even when that language feels bruised, even when it's been used against those we love, even when it catches in our throat. Because if we abandoned it, if we leave it up to those who would be more willing to define America without us, what would America be? America the what? America the obedient, the fearful, the closed? That America is real. It has always been real. It is the America that did those world fairs without black people there. It is the America that enslaved millions. It is the America that defined itself by who was not American. We cannot pretend that that America is some outside corruption of our national story. It is the story, but it is not the full story. We are America the argued over. We are America the protested. We are America the amended. We are America the resisted. We are America the unfinished. That is the America I still care about, not because it is innocent or good or godly, not because it is easy to be proud of, but because the blank is still being filled in. America That question is not settled yet. It has been asked for 250 years, and again, it is being answered right now. And are we going to be part of that answer? I want us to be part of that answer. I want us to be America the honest, America the generous, America the plural, America the brave enough to tell the truth, America the free, not just for some, but for all. And then, maybe, we'll be America the beautiful. Thank you. Our closing words are from Frederick Douglass, August 3rd, 1857, on the limits of tyrants. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted, either with words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescripted by the endurance of those who would oppose them.